All right, ladies, happy Wednesday. I am so happy to be here and thank you all for showing up and taking time to invest in knowledge, really just learning more about health and wellness, because at the end of the day, I always say that if you're helping yourself, you are helping your loved ones. My motto is help a mama, help a family. And so today I'm really honored to have Lauren Pastrana on as a guest speaker. And I want to hand it over to her. But before I do, first of all, Lauren, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your time. I know you're a mom, a working mom. You're busy like so many of us. Oh, what happened to my camera? Okay. So I know you're busy. So many of us are. I know I have teachers that are here that they're tired, insurance agents, paralegals, all that stuff. But what I really just want to share is that when I saw that you did that documentary on Illuminating Alzheimer's, I remember I sent you a message and I'm like, this is really, like informative and touching to me. Something's wrong with my camera, but anyway, informative to me because both my in-laws are currently suffering from Alzheimer's. And my clients, a lot of my clients that have been with me for a while know, because I've shared this story, that we've had to like pay for caretakers and things like that because they're not mindful or well enough to even cook, to take a bath. They don't remember. It's a lot of things that we've seen that they like decreased. And I have a grandmother that passed away from Alzheimer's. And I remember that you were like, watch the documentary. I did. And that's when I said, oh my gosh, Lauren, if you can share your takeaways or anything that you learned and share this with my clients, it would be so valuable because we are all here because we're trying to improve our health and wellness. So again, I want to say thank you. I did tell my clients that at the end, if we can have a little bit of time for question and answers. But other than that, I really just want you to share what you learned. What were your takeaways? What were tips that maybe you can pass on to us? Like if we were your friends or your sister, and then I'm sure we'll take notes. And if I have any questions, then we'll open it up at the end. So Lauren, take it away.
Thank you so much, Susie, for inviting me and for being interested in the Alzheimer's special. When I shared that I was going to be doing the Illuminating Alzheimer's, I posted on social media as we do, like, hey, tune in a few days and have this special. And I was expecting, a few likes, a couple like, oh, can't wait to see it, that sort of thing. I was overwhelmed by the number of people who commented on that one little post saying, oh my gosh, my aunt had it, my grandfather, my mother or father is dealing with it right now, or I'm worried because it runs in my family, and what about genetic testing? So many people had all these questions, and I thought to myself, like, this is why I do this job. This is why we're made to tell stories. Sometimes, news gets a bad rap. For those of you who don't know, I'm the evening news anchor at CBS News Miami, Channel 4. So I do the 5, the 6, the 7, and the 11 p.m. news. So yes, I'll be back on tonight at 11 p.m. But unfortunately, so much of the news we cover is, what happened, which we can't change, but what interested me about covering Alzheimer's, not just because of my own family connection to it, was because, okay, so much we think there's no cure, there's nothing we could do about it. But I wanted to look into what we could do about it. Maybe we're not finding the cure. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but what have the experts learned? And I wanted to be able to bring that to our viewers. I like how you said, Susie, you help a mom, you help a family. To me, it's like you help one viewer learn something and they tell their village and their village tells their village. And hopefully that information gets to the people who need to hear it. So that's really why I decided to embark on this journey of telling the Alzheimer's story. For me, like others, it's personal because my grandmother had Alzheimer's disease and her mother had it. So also my great grandmother. So I have grown up knowing that this was something on my maternal side of the family. But it wasn't until, get this, and I didn't even know this until I was doing this special, that I found out that on my paternal side, my grandmother also had Alzheimer's at the time of her death. I didn't know. My father, my biological father, passed away when I was just 20 months old. So I don't know too much about the medical history of that side of the family. I mean, I talked to them and their family, but it wasn't like my mom's side, that's the grandmother I grew up with, attached to. She would, make me puree and all kinds of stuff. Like, so that was the one that I knew her story. I didn't know so much about my other grandmother's story. So when I did this special, my aunt, my father's sister contacted me and she said, after your grandmother died, we did the autopsy and we found out that she also had Alzheimer's. And for so long, Alzheimer's has been a disease that you could only truly diagnose after someone died. Truly, the only way to know was in an autopsy. But now, what we've learned is the science has evolved so much that there are PET scans, there are MRIs, there are things you could do that will find the amyloid tangles, they call it, on the brain, these protein buildups on the brain, these plaques that are believed to be what is causing Alzheimer's, what's causing the forgetfulness, what's causing people to like the dementia that purely takes over. So in just my reporting, I learned more about my family than I ever intended to learn. And I know a lot of other people, I hope, learn as much as well from what we uncovered. And what was my catalyst was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. And he cared for my grandmother with Alzheimer's. And I just looked at him and I was like, you are an angel on earth. You being a caretaker is such an undervalued position in society, especially a familial caretaker where you're not getting paid. This isn't like, you're not a nurse. You don't know what you're doing. You're learning, by the seat of your pants here. And he just dedicated his life to caring for her and truly making her final years here as happy and comfortable as possible. So I wanted to do stories about caretakers, but I was like, okay, I can't do a story about caretakers without doing a story about patients, and I can't do a story about patients without telling the story about what is Alzheimer's. And then it was like, well, what are the treatments? What's out there? So I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about what I learned when I really like jumped into the rabbit hole, because there's really no end to what's out there. So I will tell you, since I know this is a health and wellness group, the number one thing, I think I interviewed 6 different doctors, that they all told me was vascular health is the key. What is good for your heart is good for your brain. So as much as you might not be thinking, exercising is helping me fight off Alzheimer's or dementia down the road or other cognitive things, it is. It's all interconnected. Keeping your vessels and your heart happy and healthy is one of the things that they said was the key takeaway in a lot of their research. Because again, with no cure, all we could do is control what is in our own power right now. So that was the number one thing that they talked about was, controlling your heart health. They suggested, a lot of the experts I spoke to suggested the Mediterranean type diet. That was something that they said was very good in helping your cognitive abilities. Veggies, fruits, whole grains, olive oil, fish, that sort of thing. I'm sure you guys have, read all about the different, diets. I hate to call them diets because really it's like an eating lifestyle. It's not so much, counting calories. It's just about, having good, whole, nutritious food as opposed to some of the processed stuff that we all know and love and eat far too often. So that was another thing. But one of the things that struck me the most, and that I didn't get to get into too much in the special because it was so specific to a specific group of people, is the perimenopause and the menopause connection to Alzheimer's. And I was floored when I heard this because I always thought there's more prevalence of women with Alzheimer's because we live longer, right? So of course we're going to be the ones who are diagnosed more. But research is showing that it's not just because we live longer and have more time to develop Alzheimer's. It's also the changes that our bodies go through when we go through the menopause transition. So like starting at like 45 years old and for years of the perimenopause transition, as the hormones change in our bodies, that is potentially leading to the buildup of the plaque and amyloid tangles in the brain. So there's tons of research out there now underway that's looking into, well, is there sort of hormone replacement therapy that women should be undergoing that would potentially help them in staving off Alzheimer's down the road? Because if you think about the different symptoms of menopause, for example, you got hot flashes, anxiety, depression, memory lapse. These are not, ovary issues. These are brain issues. It's all connected to your brain. So there's a lot of research going on right now that really is starting to shed a light on why women in particular are more affected than men. And then for us here in South Florida, the recent study showed that Miami-Dade County has the #1 highest prevalence of Alzheimer's in the entire country is in Miami-Dade County. Wow. And that's because of the demographic makeup of Hispanic Latinos and African Americans in Miami-Dade County. They are more predisposed to develop Alzheimer's. And that goes into different comorbidities. I hate to use that word because it sounds morbid, but like other issues that are prevalent in the Hispanic Latino communities, the African American communities. You're talking diabetes, heart health, things like that we see in greater numbers in our community. That is, potentially what is leading to the higher number of Alzheimer's in our South Florida community, and specifically amongst, Latina women in Miami-Dade County. It can't get more specific than that to us. I'm looking at the last names and I see, like, Medina, Marrero, Solares, like I'm seeing Nunez. I know there's a lot of Latina women on this call right now, myself included. So it was really an eye-opening experience to be like, whoa, not only is this personal to me from my family, but it's personal to every woman I know, all my friends here at home. This is impacting them. So that's really what I set out to uncover. And I learned a lot. I'm used to asking questions, not, answering questions. So if you guys have questions for me, feel free to let it rip, Susie, if that's fine with you. I'm not one to present, but I'm more than willing to answer any questions you all might have to the best of my ability.
Lauren, that's so valuable. Oh, wait, let me see if I think there's like an echo, of course. I don't know why I'm having like tech issues today. Do you hear an echo?
No.
Oh, okay. Crazy about what you learned. I can go back to the PET scans and the protein buildup that is actually now being able to be seen. But let's go into the demographic thing there for a second. So if I'm clear, because of our genetics, like that is why we are more prone to Alzheimer's?
Well, it's interesting because it's not just genes, it's how the genes play a factor in, and your environment also plays a factor altogether. So you can't just say, because you're a Hispanic woman, you're going to get it. No, obviously like that, but there are the family connections. So when you put it all together, it's like a giant puzzle. So I have gone back and forth personally on whether I want to do the genetic testing to see if I have the gene, because look at all the information I just gave. It's like, maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I have all the other, prerequisites. So even if you don't have the gene, it doesn't mean you won't get it. The gene just means you're a little bit more predisposed. But it's interesting because in some of the research, it showed that when I said, obviously Hispanics, but African Americans specifically, it's African Americans here in the United States. But if you're looking at Africans in Africa, they are not at the same genetic predisposition. So it's not purely about the color of one's skin. It's also about where you are, the food you eat. It's totally different sources, and their lives are completely different. So the prevalence is specifically in African Americans, not so much just in all people of color. Because if you look at, certain Europeans or, Spaniards, it's very different than the instance of Alzheimer's that you would see, in Cuban American, Mexican American, basically anything American. It changes the prevalence. And I think we all know that we live different lifestyles than they do. In Europe, they walk many places. They have better diets than we do. I mean, overall, not to say that everyone, but, when you're looking at the standard, the American standard versus the European standard, you will see those differences. And scientists and experts are saying that is coming across in the numbers as far as the demographics for people who do ultimately end up being predisposed to Alzheimer's. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, right, but it means that you're at a likely higher risk.
So that is so crazy to me. So is it safe to say that environmental disruptors play a role?
There's a whole school of research going on right now at Florida International University. They have a whole lab dedicated to the truly environment, like the pesticides we spray on the food and, right, what kinds of food you're ingesting. So they did find that in, it's called DEET, which is what a pesticide they used to spray many years ago. I think it's been officially outlawed for a very long time, but that's it. Once it's in your soil, like plants are still growing out of there. So it's never really, even though they don't actively spray it now, they're saying that there are still traces of it found in things in food that we consume, and that has been linked to a higher instance of Alzheimer's as well. So yeah, it's all over, unfortunately. But there are things that we can do. Like you say, what can you control? That's all you can do, right? Is worry about what you actually have the power to control. And that is, yes, what you consume and what you put out, what you do with your body. So I know it sounds very dire, but if you watch the special, I hope that people left feeling hope. That was the whole point of it, that, we are so far from where we were even, 5, 10 years ago. One of the women that I interviewed, Dr. Parachak Vance, she used to work at Duke. Now she's at the University of Miami. And she was the woman who is credited with discovering the ApoE4 gene that determines that, you are more predisposed to having Alzheimer's disease. So now she's working here at the University of Miami, and she even said it herself. She's like, we are light years ahead of where we were 20 years ago when we first discovered that gene. But look, even with that, even saying that we're light years ahead, we are just now in the era of treatment. They're not looking for a cure yet. They're looking for just to treat the people who already have it, or to stop people from getting it, is where a lot of the scientists say, like, if we could just hold it off from people getting Alzheimer's for another 20, 30 years, we'll be good. Like, instead of people getting it at 80 or 90, if we could, push it down 20, 30 years down their lifespan, they'll be, 120 years old. And obviously that wouldn't be a factor anymore. So that's kind of what they're focusing on right now, is, treatment and prevention, because a cure is still, unfortunately, out of reach.
Got it. So I want to open it up to, the women that are here. I still have more questions, but I definitely want to open it up to them. So if you girls have any questions and you want to unmute, please feel free. This is your time to ask Lauren anything that may be on your mind or something that you learned. So feel free to unmute and ask away, because if not, I will take over.
Hi, good evening, Lauren. How are you?
Hi there. How are you?
Good, and you? Okay, I have a question. On that family member that you found out postmortem had the autopsy and then it came out that they had Alzheimer's, were there any signs that the family saw prior that would have said, oh yeah, now everything makes sense? Or was it just something that they found post?
So by the time she passed, she was 96 years old. So she went a long life. I mean, like I said, this is my grandmother, who I knew. I mean, yes, my father passed when I was a baby, but she was still in my life. And until she was like 92, 93, like, she was with it. She was there. She was fine. She would get dressed. She would go to St. Timothy Church every Saturday, every Sunday to go to mass. She'd get her earrings on. Like, she was all about getting all ready. She had a fall. So she hurt her hip and she had other, health concerns. So she was put into a home because, unfortunately, she couldn't be cared for. She had been living with my aunt, but she couldn't be cared for anymore in the same way. It's difficult. I mean, she was 93 years old at that point. So she was already in the home, and then the mental decline started. And because she was already so advanced in age, they weren't thinking like, oh my gosh, we need a diagnosis. They just thought, normal old age dementia. Sure, because there's a difference. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent, popular type of dementia, but there's still different kinds. There's Lewy body dementia. There's like aphasia, which is, I believe, is what Bruce Willis has. There's all different things that's not specific to being labeled as Alzheimer's. Although when you lump them all together, they're considered, cognitive, degenerative type of diseases. So they just never thought to get her officially diagnosed because she was already in a long-term care facility. She was older in age. So that's why. It's not that they didn't realize, like, oh my gosh, she's lost her memory. It's just they didn't proceed with the diagnostics of it until after she had passed, because they didn't really see the need to put her through that at that stage in the game. Now, my grandmother on my mother's side, she was officially diagnosed. She passed in 2017. So she was 85 when she passed. And her mother had it. So my grandmother my maternal grandmother came from a whole different, ball game, so to speak. She knew that it was potentially in her future. She had seen what it had done to her mother. So she would do everything. She would do crossword puzzles and Sudoku, and she went to the gym, and she did all that she could. She did everything that she could to potentially, help her brain. She ate right. She exercised. She had my grandfather, who he's not my mom's dad, but he is, the only grandfather I've ever known. But they married later in life after my biological grandfather passed away, and he's American, no Spanish. So her fear was, because in Alzheimer's, it's proven that people revert back. If you're bilingual or multilingual, you revert back to your first and your primary language, and hers was Spanish. So she got to the point where she was back to only Spanish and he only spoke English. So it was the challenge of communicating. So for years, she was trying to fight it off because she wanted to be able to communicate with him for as long as possible. So she went into it from a whole different, perspective. So she, had the doctor's visits and the true diagnostics and the PET scans and all that stuff to prove that she had it and she was living with it. I would say her decline, it was pretty, I don't want to say slow, but you could see it over time, over like the span of years. So when my son was born, who's 9, she was okay. But then by the time the next grandchild was born, she was forgetting like which grandchild it was. And then by the next one, she just didn't know that that she didn't know she had grandchildren anymore. She thought that my mom was her sister and that I was her daughter. Like she had, so then we saw it. But that transition from, kind of forgetful to not knowing who anyone was, that did feel fast. It felt like it was from one day to the next. She just didn't remember us. So I've seen from both sides. I'm going around and I'm answering I'm kind of answering 10 things at once because as the stories come to me. But yeah, so with my one grandmother, it was just not, it was their decision not to diagnose because of her particular factors in life. My other grandmother decided to tackle it head on from the beginning.
Anyone else? Thank you for that. Marissa, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, good. Anyone else? Don't be shy, ladies. This is your time with her. Gladys, you have a question? I could tell. You can unmute.
There we go. I figured it out. Sorry. So basically, just to make sure that what I understood, that the best thing that we can do preventatively is basically our health and fitness and our nutrition.
Yeah. And it seems so simple. It seems like, well, doesn't everybody do that? Because I was kind of like, okay, how do I tell people like, just exercise and eat right? Because obviously sometimes you exercise and eat right and you'll still get it. It's just, it's bound to happen. But they say if you do it, it will prolong or push back, which buys time. And now with all the treatments that are potentially out there on the market, so to speak, it could help. And so the other day I was at an event with the Alzheimer's Association. They were talking about a new study where I think it's 45 and up. So if you're 45 years old with a family history, you don't have to be exhibiting any symptoms at all. But if you're 45 or older with a family history, that you could, participate in this study and they would give you medication that could potentially be preventative. Now, that's a whole other thing. I don't know. People may not want to take a medication preventatively without any sort of treatment or without any sort of diagnosis. That's, a personal decision. But that's the kind of things that are out there now because they think that this preventive medication could stop the, amyloid and beta amyloid and the protein plaques from building up in your brain in the first place. So that's something that's out there now. The treatments that have been approved, FDA approved already, they're monoclonal antibody treatments. So those monoclonal antibodies, we heard of that a ton with COVID. That was what people were being given, when they actually got sick, to help them, speed up the recovery time. And so this particular treatment is administered in the same way as those monoclonal antibody treatments. These are infusions, injections, that sort of thing. And they're showing great success in slowing the buildup of that amyloid plaque protein in the brain, but they don't take out what's already in there. So that's why some people are saying, if you can start taking that beforehand, that could potentially help. But, we're all health conscious people. We don't want to just be putting things in our body for no reason, if we don't have to. So the next best thing is, continue to eat right, to exercise, they say walking is great because it's just that vascular health. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I know when we talk about losing weight, it's like, oh, lifting and, all like toning up and all that, but just as simple as walking, getting your heart rate up and getting the blood pumping through your whole body is something that they cannot stress enough the importance of. So that's something that was talked about a lot. And then there's all kinds of other research out there that suggest things like, you know, listening to salsa music, that it has like, is doing a study on this right now. I'm working on a story. So this is, you know, pre-TV release, is that is doing a study to see how salsa music in particular, it's not just any music, but something about the way that salsa music gets the brain receptors working potentially helps with maintaining cognitive ability. So that's something that's being looked at. Again, FIU is looking at the stuff in the environment that plays a role. So the good news is that there's a whole host of really talented experts out there who are truly dedicated to changing the future of this disease for so many people. So it's hopeful right now.
That's excellent. Gladys, does that answer your question? Anyone else? No? Yes? Because if not, I'm going to take it away. Yes, Gladys.
So your maternal grandmother that was so intentional about, you know, doing all the stuff because she knew that she was predisposed to it. Did it ever come up like that was in fact helpful to push it back for her, or to make it like less I don't know what the right word.
No, and her name was Gladys too, by the way. So I keep seeing your name and it's like, yeah, my grandma Gladys is what we called her. So we don't know for sure. Obviously, there's no way of saying like, yes, you know, she could have gotten it so much earlier had she not been doing all these things all along. But we like to think so. Her doctors seem to think, you know, that yes, there's a very likely chance that she could have had it much earlier on had she not done all she had done to, you know, hold it at bay for as long as she could. So she really didn't start showing full-blown symptoms of it until she was in her, you know, early 80s. So she passed at 85. So it was those last like 4 or 5 years is when you could tell. But people are getting it younger and younger, the diagnoses, because of the ability to diagnose so much earlier now. So the woman that I interviewed for the special, she was diagnosed in her 50s. She was diagnosed in her 50s. Her father was also diagnosed very young. So she was like, you know, I'll be darned if I'm going to go down that same path, because she saw what it did to him and how it impacted his life. And she was like, I don't want the same thing to happen to me. So she did the genetic testing and saw that she was, yes, predisposed. She had the gene. And then she started noticing her own changes, like, you know, forgetting like her usual route to work, or forgetting like, because, you know, we all forget, you know, simple things like, oh, where did I put my keys? What did I have for lunch yesterday? Like so many times I'm like, oh my gosh, does that mean it's coming? Like it's here now. Like, but no, this was like consistent forgetfulness of, you know, things that you shouldn't be forgetting all the time. And then, you know, seeing a family member and being like, oh, what's your name? Like, and not remembering the familial connection. She's like, once I felt that, she said, I wasn't going to wait anymore to, you know, see if it got better, see if it was just, you know, menopause. Like she wasn't willing to wait and see. But at the time when she was diagnosed, PET scans weren't covered by insurance. The treatments were definitely, treatments just now were starting to be covered within the last 3 months. Like this is very, very new. And I think actually I got an email from the Alzheimer's Association a couple of days ago that Medicaid and Medicare just started covering PET scans. So this is all still so new. So she, at the end of the day, her biggest advice was advocate for yourself. Advocate for yourself, because no one else is going to do it. So if you feel like there's more to it, and you just keep pushing. And so she did, and she found a study, and she joined the study, and she is taking the medication. Now, she doesn't know if she's on the medication. That's another thing. So with these studies, she is going for her injections weekly, but she doesn't know if she's actually getting the medication or if she's getting the placebo, because she's in the study. She says she feels, you know, like she hasn't gotten any worse. So she says she's hopeful, but she says, you know, I'm not going to go down without a fight. So if it's not me who's getting it, maybe someone else is getting it and they're getting better. And if they are, great, it'll get approved, and then I can get it when it's approved. Like, so she's willing to do whatever it takes, not just for herself, but, you know, for the greater good, so to speak, to help everyone out. So she was truly inspiring. If you haven't seen the special, if you just want to watch the first like 5 minutes to see her story, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, so I will say that I think everyone here should watch the documentary. I found it on YouTube. It's called Illuminating Alzheimer's. And I've actually watched it twice because this for me is something that, like I said, is very dear and near to me. My grandmother passed from it, and both my in-laws are suffering from it. And as a matter of fact, Lauren, you said something that I was like, yes, I should ask her about that. So I personally, he hasn't been diagnosed, but I think my father-in-law has Lewy body dementia.
Mhm.
Did you learn anything how that is linked to Alzheimer's? Because I know
Un-
that they differ in some way,
yeah,
but they're very similar
unfortunately,
too.
yeah. Unfortunately, I did not dive deep enough into that to be comfortable speaking on it. It was just one of those where, one of the people told me, there's different kinds. So, just because someone has forgetfulness or some form of dementia, it's different. There are different diagnoses. For example, I don't want to misspeak, so I don't want to say specifically that it was Lewy body or one of the other dementias, but some like impact just the frontal lobe. Some are, in the stem. Some, it's just different parts of your brain are affected. In Alzheimer's, though, I believe my understanding is that the plaques can build up anywhere on the brain. So that's like sort of the signature of Alzheimer's, is more these plaques that build up. But there's new research out there saying that maybe there's even more to it than that. Maybe just, plaques on the brain are common for everyone, and they're not, impacting everyone the same way. So that's the research that's still unfolding. There's still so much to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I know with the Lewy body dementia, that's something that, is very particular, but I caught on because the paranoia was intense. And I'm like,
Mm.
I think it's this. When I looked at all the symptoms, he defines that. And based on that note, if I were to ask you, while you were doing this documentary, what are the most common symptoms that you learned of?
I mean, the trademark is obviously the forgetfulness.
Right.
It's just, the basic, and but not just your ordinary, like I said, forgetting what you ate or things like that. No, it's
It's
the
almost like not
forgetfulness.
recognizing people too,
Yeah,
correct?
it's not recognizing people. That thankfully for most people happens at that point they are diagnosed, or they know that something. It's not just one day from one day to the next that you don't recognize someone.
Right.
But common things like like I said, like her route to work. This woman, the route she took all the time, she couldn't remember it. Her father, with him, he was a boater, and he would take the boat out all the time, and he knew all the channels, and he knew where he was going. And then one day he took the boat out and he could not remember how to get home. And this is on a boat. Like, that's terrifying for the whole family. So they said, no more for you, no more boating. So the main thing is, yes, that, because the other symptoms are things that can't be diagnosed just by simply looking at someone. There are cognitive tests. So has a place, I want to say it's called the Memory Care Center. I'd have to go back and look at all my notes, but they have a place where you can go and you could do this cognitive, they call it a cognitive stress test. So, when you're having like heart issues, you go and you walk the treadmill at your cardiologist's office, and they put all the little stickers and they track all this stuff. Well, and their memory, I believe it's the Memory Care Center is what it's called, has a cognitive stress test. So, but it's not just a 1-day test. So they track you over time to see the progression, because that's truly, the best gauge of whether the disease is progressing in you. And then, of course, if they see, let's say you do the cognitive stress test and they have concerns, then is when a doctor now can, say, okay, let's, recommend a PET scan, let's recommend an MRI, let's do something else. Because it's not just, it's not symptoms like, headaches and sleepiness, for example. So that's why it's so hard to diagnose, and why for years it was things that people weren't diagnosing until, post-mortem in autopsies. That's why, like, CTE, for example, which is a disease that a lot of football players get. Well, it's one of those things that for the most part, you can't diagnose it until you cut their brain open. You could probably see symptoms in all of them that are familiar, and if you kind of lump it together, but there's no way to know for sure until you do that one test.
Yeah.
We're lucky now that we don't have to wait until it's too late to do that test. There's options out there. But again, it's just now being covered by Medicare and Medicaid. I'm sure other insurance companies aren't too excited to cover it, because these are expensive diagnostic tests that they don't take lightly. So I'm sure the hoops you have to jump through are many to get that kind of testing approved. But again, that goes back to just advocating for yourself and saying, no, I want to do this and I want to figure it out. And if it means going to like 10 different specialists until one of them says that you could do it, if you truly feel it. I'm not saying to just, go looking for a problem. Like,
Right.
don't
Of
do that.
course.
But if you're seeing these things, and I will say, one of the things that I have learned seems to be more of a signature of Alzheimer's and perhaps other dementias is specifically like the sundowners. So like certain times of day, like in the evenings, people with Alzheimer's tend to get a little bit more agitated. They're not so like accepting of the fact that they can't remember. They start to get mad that they can't
Yes.
remember these things
Yes.
anymore. And that is something like, another signature of Alzheimer's that I don't believe is as common in the other forms of dementia. But I'm sure, it's seen to some extent, but that's something that the experts see a lot with Alzheimer's too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because my mother-in-law gets very frustrated, and so did my father-in-law until he got on meds. Very agitated, to the point where if you would call her out and say, not in a bad way, but just say like, you didn't, you don't remember that we talked about this, she would get so angry to the point where she would respond with an attitude and then come back with a lie, like to defend herself. And that's when we were kind of like, my mother-in-law has never been a liar. So we started catching that on. And the other thing that you mentioned that made me think of was she lost her car one time in Publix. And we were like, she called her daughter and she was like, I can't find my car. And we were like, that's a problem. And that was when we decided as a family to just say, you know what, you're not going to drive anymore, because at the end of the day, she could have gotten lost, which I think has happened in the past, that she would be like, I'm lost. I don't know where I'm at. And then her daughter had her on Life 360 and had to guide her back to say, this is where you got to go. Yeah. So it got very serious. So I'm glad you're mentioning these things, because these are things that we could be aware of. And the awareness is key,
I also want to touch on, because you're speaking more from the caretaker family side of things. And one of the things that I learned in all of this was caretakers need to be taking care of their mental health in all of this, because they suddenly become, the bad guy, taking away their keys, telling them, oh no, that's not what happened. Oh no, you're wrong. And it takes a toll. So the two caregivers that I interviewed, one of them went through a terrible depression. She was in college when her mom was diagnosed, so she was young. And, the day that her mom couldn't remember her name, and not just couldn't remember her name, she like got mad at her and said, no, tú no eres mi hija. Like, I don't know you. Like, it takes a toll on the caretaker as well. So even if you're not on it from the patient side of it, it's so important to protect your mental health and your peace as well as a caretaker going through all of this. So there are resources out there, there are support groups out there. And just knowing that you're not alone, I think helps a lot as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had 5 caretakers quit on us because they were like, we can't anymore. Remember, they're taking care of 2 people at the same time.
True.
And so this last person, we decided to give her more days off so that she could have that disconnect and that break. So we've learned through this process, this 1.5-year process, that, on the caretaker, it takes more of a toll, because there's times where my mother-in-law's just like happy-go-lucky. She just thinks that every day is the same and not a big deal, but the caretakers are the ones that really carry that. So yeah. Okay. Another question I have for you is, and I know Gladys asked about, what can you control? But if you were to look back at, your, I guess your exploration with this, and if I were to say, Lauren, what can you control? Because I always tell my clients, control the controllables. I know it would be nutrition, fitness, like some sort, exercise or walking. What else would you say? Is there anything else that you would like advise?
In addition to those things, one of the things that the doctor mentioned is also just the social component. So many people, specifically like say with COVID, and when you were, isolated from other people, they believe that, maybe there was how do I word this without, I don't want to say that it caused it, because it didn't cause it, but maybe people who were, on the path to developing full-blown Alzheimer's, it may have sped it along because of the isolation, because of the lack of interaction with other humans for extended periods of time. So that is something they say, because I asked them, I'm like, what about the puzzles? My grandmother did Sudoku and crossword. They said more than the puzzles, it's the social interaction, just normal talking to people every day. This isn't about like testing your brain every day to remember that the Pythagorean theorem and whatever other random knowledge from 7th grade math or whatever. It's about, just day to day talking with people, connecting with other human beings is so important. So
I
even just
love
things
that you're
like
saying
this,
that.
yeah,
I love that because that is one of the reasons why I love being a wellness coach that coaches women in groups, because they have a safe space in my app where they can come, be social, still have a safe space to share their struggles, but we're like-minded women who are going after a common goal. And we've built amazing relationships from it. And there is that social aspect. There is that community, that place of belonging and supportive. While they find a place where they can belong, while they're taking care of themselves and we're all busy and we're all moms and things like that, they still can feel, okay, this is a safe space where I belong and I can be social, me while I'm taking care of myself in the good and in the hard and the bad and all those things. So I love that you said that, because a lot of people will say, no, I'll do this on my own. But we're not meant to do life alone. We're meant to do
we're
so
not.
many things with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Love that. Okay. I asked you about symptoms. I love that you mentioned the walking, because I know that walking has incredible benefits. And I know that we're, I passed 45 minutes. Anyone else have any other questions? Because I have one more before we close out, and I'm going to let Lauren get back to work. Does anybody have any other questions? Any comments? Yes, no, maybe?
Thank you so much. This has been really it's an amazing, I have no words. Like really,
Thank you.
It
Thank
really
you so
opened
much.
up my eyes to this, because I'm a teacher. I teach emotional behavior disabilities, but in my step grandmother, I'm kind of like noticing some of the stuff that you have mentioned. So now I can, thank you. I really appreciate.
My pleasure. In the news we tell so many, horrible, devastating stories, but that's it. They're just stories and we don't get to really follow up. So the fact that they gave me the opportunity to tell a story like this, that is not just, tell the story and move on, but it's really about the impact for the whole community. It means so much to me, one, that they let me do it, and two, that it has had an impact on other people and that I've been able to share what I learned beyond just what I did on air. So just, having this conversation with all of you tonight is really special to me too.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Okay, Lauren, one last question. For me, if you were to just basically close out with what gave you the most hope, what would it be? When you look back at everything that you did and what you learned and the stories.
I think what gave me the most hope is the fact that they gave me 30 minutes to do this special, and I could have filled it with 3 hours worth of content, because there's so much going on. There's so much research. There's so much that I wasn't even able to touch on. So the fact that after the special aired, I got 2 calls from 2 different PR people from 2 different doctors saying, why didn't you interview my doctor who's researching this? And why aren't you interviewing my person who's researching this? And it's just been like a flood of people saying, well, I have this specialist, this clinician who's looking into this. And I have this family who's talking about how it impacted them. Like, there's so much more out there. So that was my big takeaway, that while I felt, at first, oh, this is just something that my family went through, I never really realized, no, first of all, it's so many other families out there. And then I thought, okay, but then what? Well, there's a lot happening that we don't see. So it just gave me hope to know that while families are living it, there's, hundreds and thousands of other experts using all their brain power and all their knowledge and all their funding to try to keep this from happening to other families in the future. So that's really what gave me hope in the end.
Well, there you go, ladies. Think about it. We, are flooded with information and resources and experts. And that really should give us hope, because if we see that we're going through that, or a loved one, we have to advocate for ourselves and for our loved ones, like she said. And there is stuff out there. So, you know, we shouldn't feel like if we're the only ones and that we're alone and that there's no hope because there's no cure. No, it's about going out there and doing the research. But what I love the most about this call was that it goes back to what I always teach you girls is well-being in a holistic way, and a holistic approach is so vital because it affects us in so many ways. It impacts us in so many ways. So that's why I'm so adamant about eating whole foods, eating healthy, taking care of yourself, moving your body, staying connected in the community, making sure you're hydrated. All those things play such a huge role. And so that is why I continue to do what I do when I have one client, when I have 20, when nobody shows up for a call, day in, day out. I have the haters on Instagram. Then there's days where I have people that are like, keep doing what you're doing. It, to me, if I can help one person, even myself, it's all worth it. Because at the end of the day, like I said, when you help yourself, you help your loved ones. When you help a mama, you help a family. So continue to do what you ladies are doing, taking care of yourselves, investing in yourselves. I applaud you for every single, you know, choice that you make by bettering yourself. And again, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your time, your knowledge. I love it. I took like 4 pages of notes. And I'll be
My
able to share
pleasure.
this recording with other mommies and women that weren't able to attend tonight. But thank you again. I really appreciate you. And hopefully we can connect in the future. Who knows?
Yes.
Maybe you'll have more information.
Hopefully
Yeah.
there'll be more good news coming soon. So
Absolutely.
stay tuned.
Yes. All right, ladies. Have a great night. And I'll talk to you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.